A raft of new U.S. tariffs on more than 90 countries has taken effect, upending decades of trade policy. U.S. President Donald Trump announced the start of the measures, which include lower rates for some countries that have signed trade deals with him. The tariffs mean companies bringing foreign goods into the U.S. will have to pay new duties ranging from 10% to 50%. This map you're seeing shows the rates due on goods from different countries. Trump and his supporters say the measures will help cut the trade deficit and create new jobs. But economists say the costs will be passed on to consumers, including, for example, the cost of a cup of Brazilian coffee. Brazil has been hit with tariffs of 50%, despite the fact that the U.S. actually has a trade surplus with the country. President Ignacio Lula da Silva accuses his U.S. counterpart of not being civilized.
The civilized way for two heads of state to negotiate is to have the will to make the decision along with Brazil. He could have communicated with Brazil. He could have called. He could have proposed a negotiation. But we received the tariff statement in a completely authoritarian manner. We're not used to negotiating in this way. Not like this. We believe that a country that has 201 years of civilized diplomatic relations will not throw that away because of the intemperate attitude of a president.
We can dig a little deeper now and bring in Valentina Sader. She's with the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center and joins us from Washington tonight. Welcome, Valentina. Now, if Brazil doesn't have a trade surplus over the U.S., why did Donald Trump slap them with some of the highest tariffs, 50%?
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here once again. President Trump's executive order actually mentioned three main things as the issues that justified the tariffs against Brazil. It's definitely an escalation from the 10% that Brazil received on Liberation Day to the 50% that we have right now. Trump actually defined those tariffs based on the unfair, or what he perceives to be unfair treatment of former President Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, as well as the regulations of Brazilian legislative on social media, in particular, calling that unfair practices against U.S. companies in particular. And then on trade specifically, he mentioned what he perceives also to be some unfair treatment of U.S. companies in general in Brazil, although, as you mentioned, Brazil runs a deficit with the U.S.
So Lula da Silva isn't completely wrong when he says this is blackmail, is he? What exactly is Trump hoping to get here?
Well, I don't know if I would call it blackmail. There is definitely something that President Trump is trying to get to here. And although it might be political in nature, there is space for some negotiation on the trade front as well. And we're seeing that through the USTR investigation under Section 301 on Brazil and Brazilian practice on trade policy in general. So the Brazilian government is actually seeing that as a potential avenue for negotiation, a more formal way to define what is it that the U.S. would want in terms of what they could perceive as a more mutually beneficial trade relationship, more favorable to the U.S. and to the U.S. companies in general. So there is perhaps a path there for some negotiation on the trade front, but politically, and if these tariffs are political in nature, then we will see what President Lula is mentioning in terms of the sovereignty of Brazil, especially when a lot of Brazilians perceive the tariffs of 50% to be, in a way, interfering in domestic affairs and what they consider to be an independent judiciary.
Yeah, let's look at this a little closer. Why is Donald Trump so intent on seeing the charges against Jair Bolsonaro, the former Brazilian president, dropped?
Well, there is a few things that we can point out to here. Brazil in 2022, after the presidential elections, had something similar to the January 6th invasion of Congress here in the U.S., here in Washington. What we had in Brazil on January 8th, actually, was both Bolsonaro supporters were going into the Congress, as well as what we consider the presidential palace and the Supreme Court. So the scope of it was very intense and very big in comparison, and when we put in perspective here. And this is one of the reasons why I think that there is a comparison there and something that we are looking into, something that we can relate to here. Not only that, but the former President Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo Bolsonaro, a congressional representative in Brazil, has been in the U.S. since the beginning of the year, actually advocating for a lot of these, for the U.S. to actually interfere in a way in what they perceive to be unfair treatment of his father and of the trial against Bolsonaro. In Brazil right now, we see the Congress actually and the supporters of former President Bolsonaro being in Congress saying that this is censorship and that they are not being able to, the former President Bolsonaro is not being able to speak up before his trial. So this is a bit of the political situation that we have in Brazil, and perhaps a bit of what may have led President Trump to impose 50% tariffs. In a geopolitical scope also, there is some relationship and potentially some under the radar decision there that was related to the BRICS summit that was held in Brazil, and the fact that Brazil is part of this group of countries, which includes Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a few other countries that have now joined the bloc. So that could also be one of the justifications for these tariffs on Brazil and why Brazil was hit so hard.
And just today, Lula has been talking to the Indian prime minister. India, of course, also hit by 50% levies. China has opened its market to Brazilian coffee. Can we expect a multilateral response by the BRICS countries in the weeks and months to come?
Honestly, I think that what we'll see from the Brazilian side is definitely looking to expand the sources of the destinations that they could possibly send their products to. So we will definitely see Brazil looking to expand those destinations, those export destinations. China perhaps being one. President Lula has also sent Vice President Geraldo Alckmin to Mexico to have a conversation with two Mexican officials, and then had this call with Modi today. So definitely we're seeing this move to amplify the destination for Brazilian exports in general, to mitigate a little bit of the impact that these 50% tariffs will have on Brazilian producers.
That's Valentina Sader of the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center. Great to speak to you.
Thank you.